All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second Whiskey Mavens tasting, exploring some really, really unique uh, limited release editions from Westward's Whiskey Club in particular. My name is Claire Burton Lang. I run national events for Westward. And I'm thrilled to introduce your guide and host for today's tasting, Lauren Wildman, who is coming to us from Portland, Oregon. Lauren serves as the director of the Westward Whiskey Club and has been with Westward for a very long time. So I will hand it off to her, and she is going to tell you a little bit about all these special releases that you're having and answer any questions. I think last time, Lauren, what worked best was to pause after each tasting so that folks could ask questions, give their tasting notes, things like that. So I will drop it one more time in the chat, the order in which we're tasting, since none of the bottles are labeled. They all have little colored stickers on them. And I guess we just ask everybody mute until it's time for questions so we don't get any feedback. And with that, I'll kick it off to Lauren to introduce herself.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, so my name is Lauren Wildman. I've been with Westward for, 8 years, I think. I just had my 8-year anniversary here in the early part of November. So I've been with the company since before Westward was really even something that was readily available. I've really seen the brand grow up and evolve, and it's been really exciting to be a part of this amazing craft distillery here in the American Northwest. I believe all of you are familiar with Westward, so I'm not really going to dig too deep into our original whiskey, but I think it's nice to kind of have a little reminder of where we start before we get into some of these really unique expressions, some of our more innovative experiential kind of projects. And so Westward whiskey is made right here from scratch at our distillery where I'm sitting today. We bring in about 1 million pounds of malted barley every year. There's nearly 4 pounds of malt in just one bottle of Westward whiskey. All that really beautiful malted barley is grown in the American Northwest. It's malted for us just over the Columbia River in Vancouver, Washington at Great Western Malting. And we actually mill it here on site. So we run it through a roller mill, gently crack open the grain. It hits our mash tun where we add water and obviously let the enzymes within the barley itself break down those complex carbohydrates and starches within the barley into fermentable sugar or simple glucose. As part of that extraction process, we then really treat it like a craft beer. So our philosophy is a little bit different than what you see at a typical whiskey distillery. We cool it down, we slow it down, and we use exclusively ale yeast to do our fermentation. A lot of distilleries use distiller's yeast. I mean, it's right there in the name. It's a highly effective yeast strain. It's very active. It can convert sugar to alcohol very quickly and at very high temperatures. But what distiller's yeast doesn't bring to the party is much flavor. So that's why we like to do a slow, cool fermentation process where we can really coax out interesting flavors and aromas through fermentation. For us, it's really a means. It isn't a means to an end, but rather an opportunity. Every step of the process is really flavor driven. I mean, you can produce something like 600 flavor compounds just through fermentation. So we really take our time and spend twice as long as industry standard making a craft beer that you'd actually want to drink. All of our distillers are also brewers, and we're here, of course, in the American Northwest, where beer is certainly the beverage of choice amongst many people here. So great beverage industry and really inspired by kind of our partners in the Valley and in the region here. Once we've made that delicious, strong golden ale, we put it through our big, beautiful pot still. We have 2 pot stills here on site. Our wash still is actually the largest operating alembic pot still this side of the Mississippi. It's a 3,000 gallon pot. So we do 2 stages of pot distillation. The pot distillation is going to retain a lot of flavor and texture. And I apologize if you can hear the train through my computer, but we are on the train tracks. And so if you've ever come to visit us, you know the train pain that is being stuck on the side of the tracks. Luckily, we have a lot of whiskey here to buy our time. And so once Westward's been distilled, it gets placed into brand new American oak casks. Every single time we're using virgin barrels. They're lightly charred. We do a 2-3 level char, so not incredibly not too toasted on the inside, because we do want to retain a lot of the flavor and aroma from the grain itself and that we've developed through fermentation. So that's Westward Original kind of in a nutshell. I'm obviously happy to answer more questions about original or about our other expressions that you might be familiar with. But with the expressions that you have here in front of you, we've taken that kind of core concept, what I look at as 5 key ingredients in making Westward, being malted barley, ale yeast, water, oak, and thyme. And we manipulate one of those factors. So we're either manipulating the yeast strain, and instead of using the Chico strain, that same yeast strain that they use to make Sierra Nevada, which is our typical go-to, we might swap that out with a different yeast strain and yield very, very different results. Or we might switch up the mash bill, and rather than using 100% two-row malted barley, we might introduce some other malted grain or different percentages of different grains, obviously in making. For example, the second pour tonight is a clone of a beer recipe. So we've used the malt that they would use in that beer recipe. The other factor that we play with when we're doing our kind of innovative club release whiskeys is maturation. So like I said, every batch of new make does go into a brand new virgin cask. But once we've reached maturity and we feel like the Westward in that barrel could be bottled and packaged as original, we might transfer that whiskey into a different barrel to do some additional cask finishing. We've played around with all kinds of different things. We even have some interesting projects in the works, everything from a mezcal barrel that we're aging. We have some really fun wine finishes. We've done different types of oak, like Hungarian oak or Gariana, which is a Oregon white oak. So we're always looking to kind of try something new and create something different. I think that because we're a small craft distillery, we're still nimble enough to be able to kind of be creative and try new things, which is really what the Westward Club is all about. We founded the club in 2019 because we had a whole heap of really interesting, innovative projects, and I wanted to find a way to share those with our kind of most devoted and engaged fans. And so the club was born, and there was about 30 of us to start. It was pickup only. And over the course of the last several years, it's really expanded, and now we can ship to just over 30 states across the US. We do 4 standard releases a year, and then additional optional releases and library drops throughout the year. So I think we have 7 new whiskeys slated for next year. So lots of kind of fun stuff coming down the pipeline. But the ones we're going to taste today are a few from this past year and then one that's a couple of years old. So let's start with the sourdough whiskey, and that's going to be the blue label or the blue sticker labeled S. Sourdough whiskey is something that I'm pretty sure we're the only ones doing. I know we're the first to ever experiment with this idea. This is our second edition, our vintage blend that you're tasting here tonight. The very first one was a club release back in 2020. And with the success of that release, we decided to go ahead and continue to make more sourdough whiskey. So this is a mingling of 4 different versions of that same sourdough whiskey. Now, every single batch was made the same way. So we partnered with Ken Forkish, who's a James Beard Award-winning baker here in Portland. Actually just got some really great accolades for their Ken's Artisan Pizza, one of the best pizzas in the world. And of course, their cookbook is also James Beard Award winning, and just an amazing human who makes really fabulous bread. So we, of course, partnered with them. Krogstad, who is our founder, is good friends with Ken. And as the story goes, they were actually drinking whiskey one night together, and Ken bet Christian that he couldn't make whiskey with sourdough starter. So like any good bet, the next day, Ken showed up with his sourdough starter, and Christian, put it into one of our conical fermenters, and we did what's called pre-ferment. So we grew it up into a larger batch and kind of fed it and let this yeast become really active, and then we added that to our wort in the same way that we would have added the ale yeast. But at this point, we had no idea what was going to happen, and had no idea what the flavor and aroma would yield. It took nearly 2 weeks to make that first batch, so a lot longer than we were expecting. And I can tell you from personal experience that the aromas were not good. The flavors were not good. I remember walking into the brewery and just immediately getting hit by this really intense, sour, funky flavor, and not knowing that this experiment was happening in the brewery. I literally was like, what died in here, you guys? It was awful. And tasting the new make off the still, it was just concentrated. So it really wasn't getting any better. But I told Christian, I said, you might be able to make whiskey from this, but I don't think it's anything anyone's going to want to drink. 2 years into the maturation, I was able to taste this whiskey again at the rack house at cask strength, and immediately changed my whole tune about the subject. And immediately it was like, this is going to be incredible. There was so much stone fruit and sweetness that it was different than what was typical in Westward, and it was just really exciting to see how it evolved over time. And so this is, again, no exception. It's the same process that we've done before, but we've been making more and more batches of it in hopes that one day this could join kind of our family of products. And here we have that same long fermentation. This was a 12-day fermentation. This is packaged at 90 proof, as most of our whiskeys are. We do have a few higher proof expressions that will be coming out next year. And we do offer a cask strength version, but these are going to be all 90 proof tonight. Aromas here, you're looking at a little rye spice, vanilla wafer, almost like a herbaceous peppermint quality, and then a little bit of like heather honey. The palate, we have some creamy butterscotch, a little bit, again, some mintiness, a little bit of earth, and that really kind of lovely stone fruit flavor that comes through for me. Again, that finish is going to be stone fruit, a little vanilla, and chocolate. So I'd love to hear what you guys are tasting, what you're thinking, and your perceptions of the Westward Whiskey 2nd Edition Sourdough Whiskey.
Don't everybody rush to answer.
Yeah. No, you definitely get the chocolate notes in this. The aroma is really interesting. It's very complex. I love the fact that you used the starter for it. That's amazing. I just did a sourdough for Thanksgiving, so.
Nice. This actually happened to come out in 2020. It was one of the only releases that we had a little drive-through pickup party in the early days of the pandemic, and it just was so fitting, as everybody at the time was, the sourdough craze. Everyone was at home making sourdough starter, and we had this really beautiful sourdough whiskey to complement everyone's homemade bread.
So did you name the starter?
Sorry. Did I miss something?
Yes. Who was that?
I'm happy to say something, but I don't want to interrupt. I was the first person to jump in.
Mike, go ahead.
I was just asking if you sourdough, the sourdough starter.
Sorry, you're asking what about the sourdough starter? If we use that to make...
No, I was asking if you named it. Everybody was naming their.
Oh, we named the starter? Actually, that's a good question. I don't know if Ken has a name for his, but I know that we got it from his mother, and again, just propagated it. We've since brought in several more small batches of that. Ken's actually since retired from his bakery, but he sold it to current employees, and so they've continued the legacy of Ken's Artisan through their new owner, this gentleman by the name of Theo. And he was actually just here bringing sourdough starter this week. So we're constantly still making it. And I know it's coming from the same mother batch, but I'm going to have to ask Theo next time he's around if we've got a name for it. And if not, we're going to have to take a poll and get a good name for it.
Yeah. I don't know if others experience this too, and maybe it's because the most recent Westwards that I've had have been finished. But this is consistent, beautiful flavor from beginning through the finish, like very consistent. It doesn't actually have a lot of variety, but it's a beautiful flavor. So in that way, it's much more like some of the Japanese whiskeys that do that with a single clarion flavor and not a lot of complexity. I don't usually experience that with Westward.
I agree with you. Westward tends to have a lot of ebb and flow in tasting it, I find. And this particular whiskey is a lot more clean, a lot brighter. And I completely agree with you. I think it drinks actually a lot more similar to some of the first batches that we ever produced, which is exciting for me because I loved some of those really old batches of Westward before we even had this distillery. We're making Westward about once every 2 weeks. We'd make a barrel at a time and wait for that one single barrel to reach maturity. And some of those drink a lot more like a Japanese whiskey or a Highland Scotch. Even when I first started, we used to compare it to Redbreast. So a very, very different flavor profile than we're seeing now.
Yeah. Thank you.
The orchard fruits, especially on the nose on this, are phenomenal. And there's even like a sweet, nutty, almost like cashew thing going on in the flavor that I'm finding fantastic. And it's kind of homey for me because it reminds me of Friend's beer that he brews in Chicago. That also is a saison that uses sourdough starter for the original, batches. So it's quite lovely.
So while we're going to continue to enjoy the sourdough whiskey, again, feel free to continue to ask
Yeah,
questions.
Lauren. Okay, so I let this air for a couple of weeks now since our last tasting, I think 14 days ago. Believe me, it's transformed a lot. It's completely, it's a totally different beast today. I mean, it feels like I'm drinking two different whiskeys 14 days apart. I'm surprised.
Oh, that's interesting. I think sometimes it's situational. Sometimes it's time and space, right? That you perceive things differently. But also there is some amount of change that happens through bottle conditioning. Obviously, these are smaller samples, but even just the jostling of that whiskey en route to you, and then having it sit and settle in that bottle for a longer period of time could certainly affect the flavor as well.
Because
which we
what
notice,
I try to eat the same food I ate. I mean, I generally do that across tasting. I keep my diet same, hydration level same. Kind of nerd off a bit on that, and that's why I'm surprised. This is completely different today. I had my tasting notes, and today I'm looking at my notes. And I'm saying this is not what I tasted 14 days ago. I don't know. I mean, that proves my hypothesis that air does play a big role in transformation of whiskey, especially if you let it sit half bottle or some such.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're keeping that, like, as many things at zero as you can. You're like, if all the things that I control consistency wise, I'm going to, so that my perception's always the same walking in. I love that. So I respect that. That's really cool.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I had a mic die. I had to reconnect. So I think the interesting thing for me is that despite adding more and more water to this, it just maintains that same like really uniform viscosity. Like I don't know what it is about this specific whiskey, but it just does that. Adding water brings out a ton of honey and apricot for me. It's it is different than batch one. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit about if there is any intentional change there, but it's a different experience, but it's great.
I wouldn't say that any change has been intentional, right? I mean, what we're doing is something that, of course, has a lot of organic elements that are going to change the overall whiskey at the end of the day. So even the grain that we're getting, while it's consistent, we're getting the same heirloom varietals. Year to year, we're going to see variance even through deliveries from one batch to the next. Where this barrel sits in our rack house and matures, obviously will have impact on the final flavor of that whiskey. What we tried to do here is hand select specific barrels that we've made over the course of the last several years and blend ones together to create something that we felt honored the original sourdough whiskey that we made, but wasn't the same. We weren't looking to replicate it.
Right.
When we do these kind of one-off releases, sometimes we will do something that's similar or try something that was successful again. But the goal usually isn't to replicate that, but to create another new exciting version of it. And I kind of look at that like the terroir of whiskey, right? Some wineries, their goal is to make the exact same wine every year, regardless of the outside elements affecting the crop of grapes or, whatever the case may be. But and other people's philosophy is let's let the vintage speak. Let's let whatever's happening this vintage speak to that final glass of wine. And it's kind of the same thing with whiskey. You could say, I want my whiskey to always taste the exact same way, which is, what we're doing for Westward Whiskey Original. As I mentioned before, we used to only do single barrel releases, and that was not out of choice. That was out of necessity. As more and more whiskey became mature, we were able to blend and develop a consistent flavor profile. But for our club releases and for these one-offs, the sourdough whiskey here, it's all about creating something new and different each time. So it's exciting and different each time as a club member, getting something new to try and a different version of maybe something that you've had before.
Yeah, and for anyone else that's not a club member, It's been a great membership. There's even some stuff in this tasting that's new for me, so it's nice to see that too. But it's just surprise. There's a new box on your porch. You've got 3 bottles. It's a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah, so we have 2 tiers. You can get 1 bottle each quarter or 3 bottles each quarter. That Founders Club tier, which is the 3 bottles per quarter. Sometimes there's some variance in those shipments. Sometimes you get 2 of one of another. We are looking to even expand that even further in the coming years. So you have more variety in those Founders Club shipments. And it's fully customizable. So you can always swap out a release, skip a release. There's no obligation to purchase each quarter. It's super flexible. And for me, it's just a really, like you said, it's a really great kind of exciting time. Every couple of months, I get something new and different to add to my collection. And for those of club members that tell me, oh, I have too much whiskey, or I haven't even opened my last bottle, I can't even comprehend what that's like, because I can barely get the box open before I open the bottle and want to pour it and taste it and share it with friends. And my goal is to always finish my release before the next one comes out, so I can maintain some space in my liquor cabinet.
Yeah, where I am currently in the queue is there's a purchase that's been made. There's a receipt that's in the email inbox. I know what the 3 bottles are, and someday I'm going to be surprised.
I know that they're en route to you, because I was working very hard last week to make sure that all of those orders were going through fulfillment, and they are on the way to you. I'm really hoping that you'll see that on your porch soon.
Cheers.
Lauren, you did a good job of quickly covering all of the basics for your standard Westward. But one thing that you said was where it ages in the rickhouse, and I was wondering if you could share a little bit for those of us who haven't been out to visit. What kind of rickhouses do you have, and also how much Angel's Share ends up being around the norm when it comes to aging in Portland, in your area?
Yeah, so we actually just moved our barrel warehouse like last week. It was a huge undertaking, took a year of planning to figure out how to move all of our barrels. We used to barrel age everything directly in-house when we had our smaller space, because we were producing a lot less. In 2016, we opened the facility that we're in now, and we built our own brewery. And that's when we purchased our Vendome still, which is that big 3,000-gallon pot. So we went from producing about 75 barrels of whiskey a year to producing 1,000 barrels of whiskey the first year we were at this facility. And so, of course, we needed a place to store all of these additional barrels. So out in Clackamas, which is about 20 minutes away from us, we have a big warehouse space that is not temperature controlled. It's monitored. So we are monitoring the temperature, we're monitoring the humidity, and some other factors, but we're not manipulating it. We do have large fans that help circulate the air throughout the space. One of the things that's kind of unique about our rack house is that we do store all of our whiskey palletized upright in barrel. Part of the reason for that is safety. It's a lot easier to move barrels around when they are upright and palletized. And we also found that it doesn't really have a huge effect on maturation, whether or not those casks are on their side or not. So the only ones we're aging on their side, where we want contact with both barrel heads, are ones where the barrel heads are unique. In the case of like something like our Hungarian heads barrels, the base of the barrel, the body, is American white oak, but the heads are Hungarian oak. We also age all of our wine finishes on their side, and that's typically because that's how wineries are aging those barrels as well. So we want the most contact we can with the barrel that's actually held the previous spirit or the previous wine. As I mentioned, Portland has really hot, dry summers and then really cold, wet winters. So we have an ideal climate for maturation. In the summer, when it gets really hot and dry, the whiskey does expand in the barrel. We do leave a little bit of headspace. We're using 55-gallon barrels, and we fill them to about 53 gallons. That allows for some expansion to happen within the barrel. And then during the winter months, when it's cold like it is today, all of that whiskey kind of contracts. And so I like to think of it a little bit like whiskey, like breathing in the barrel, right? So it's expanding and contracting. It's forcing itself deeper into the oak staves and then contracting again and going a little bit dormant during those colder months, which allows us to age much more quickly than you typically would. We also see more water loss through maturation than alcohol loss, which is, again, another plus. So our whiskey comes out of the barrel a little higher than it goes in. Everything goes into cask at 125. That is our cask strength, so 62.5%. I've seen whiskey come out as high as 133, 134 for some of our single barrel projects that we've done. And we see about 25% loss overall. So about 5% the first year. A lot of that is obviously because it's going into these brand new casks. You're going to see some of that soak into the oak itself. And then 2 or 3% every following year. There's no age statement on Westward. I don't think there ever will be. Age is not something that we look at as a quality marker. It's really about flavor and aroma dictating our choices. Like I said, everything's on approximately 5-6 years old that's going into bottle now. And so we're seeing about 25% in total angel share throughout that maturation process. Ken Sourdough is the only whiskey that we've released since, I want to say, 2015, maybe 2014, that has had some age statement on the bottle. And that's because a little bit of this whiskey is less than 2 years old. And so, sorry, it is 2 years old, not less than. If it's less than 3, you do have to put that on the bottle. So there is between 2 and 6 year old whiskey in the sourdough blend, but everything else in bottle that we've done since 2015 roughly has been at least 3 years minimum. One of the whiskeys that we'll taste this evening is actually our oldest single barrel to date. So you can kind of get an idea of a big difference between sourdough and that wheat wine is really maturation. Wheat wine spent 9 years in barrel, where again, some of the sourdough is 2-3 years old.
Thanks for such a thorough answer. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I was like, I hope I got it all. Like, I'm really excited to share the next whiskey with you guys. So this is going to be our Westward Whiskey 2 Malts, Bridgeport Brewing Company. We call it 2 malts when we switch up that mash bill, as I described earlier. So anytime we're integrating a new grain into the mash bill, usually you're going to see 2 malts on our label because barley is still the majority player. In this situation, we've got 32% malted rye and 68% of that beautiful Pacific Northwest 2-row malt. This is a clone of a beer recipe from Bridgeport. So if you're not familiar, Bridgeport is now defunct, but they were a very, very well-known brewery here in Oregon for many, many years, really an institution, kind of helped establish the Oregon craft beer community. And Kingpin Red Ale was one of their flagship products. So we replicated this Kingpin Red Ale. We made their beer to their specs in our brewery, and then we distilled their beer to whiskey. We've done this a few times over the years, and the brewery series is some of my favorite whiskeys we've done to date. I'm certainly someone who likes a Boilermaker. I'm definitely a beer and whiskey girl, so I love all the great malty characteristic that you're going to get out of this whiskey. We've used a couple of different types of malted rye as well, which I think adds a lot of complexity and a lot of layers of flavor to this particular whiskey. So the beer itself has a really high rye mash bill. And we've used 3 different types of varieties. We've used rye malt, caraway malt, and also chocolate rye. So a really dark toasted rye. And those really yielded some beautiful flavors and aromas. Some of the tasty notes we have on this whiskey are almond roca, fresh cut grass, and milk chocolate on the aroma. The palate, we're seeing lychee and orange marmalade, and a little bit more of that herbal mint quality that you see in Westward. And then the finish, you're going to get cooked or poached pear, a little bit of peach ring, and rye spice. So again, it's this beautiful balance between spice and kind of really great stone fruit flavors. It's like sweet and spice and malt. One of my personal favorites to date. We initially did this as a club release, and we made 4 barrels of it. We packaged 3 of those 4 barrels for our first club release that we did, and then held one back. Just kind of wanting to see what some additional time would do to the whiskey. So this is 2 years older than the first release. And I got to say, I kind of slept on the first release the first time around. I loved it, but I tasted initially off the packaging line. So I was tasting it as it was being, as bottles were being filled. And so all of that extra air that we talked about earlier really changed the flavor profile of the whiskey. And I was like, oh, this is good, but it wasn't something that I was swooning over. And then when I opened my bottle, maybe a month later, I was like, oh my God, I need to buy more of this. It's one of my favorite whiskeys we've done to date. And so this secondary release of it to me is even better than the first, and one that I've now purchased a few bottles to lay down and save for a future celebration, because it's just such a special whiskey. especially given that the brewery is no longer around. It's a really great way to kind of celebrate the Oregon beer community and this history of partnership that we've done with Westward over the years. I'm also Canadian, so for me, anything that's got a little rye in it really speaks to home and the nostalgia of drinking a lot of Canadian rye whiskey. So I do really appreciate the whiskeys that we've done with a little bit of rye in them over the years, and this one being one of the highest concentrations of rye in our mash bill. Again, to me, it's just this perfect balance of sweet and spice. So I'm hoping that you guys will enjoy it as much as I do, and please share your thoughts, comments. Tell me you hate it if you do. You're not going to offend me.
Well, I'm a rye guy, so I really am appreciating this, and I'm especially a meaty rye guy, which isn't so easy to find nowadays. So I'm loving this one. The chocolate and it all comes really through, and that light rye meaty finish is just delicious. Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you for enjoying. I think you hit the nail on the head there with that chocolate and that rye spice. It's got a lot more depth and complexity to it than the first pour that we had.
The finish on this is killing me though, because I'm getting so much of that mint, and it's like the herbal herbaceous mint stem that is just like wafting through that finish for me, and I'm really kind of loving that.
Wow, you have a very different palate than I do. You're much more sensitive to the mint.
I must be.
And I feel that way about ryes as well. Like if you're just going out and getting a rye, is that I think I'm sensitive. You're definitely sensitive to this because I got way less of that, and I'm just overwhelmed with pepper. Like it's what I want, but it's just like it's all pepper there in the end for me.
Nobody's getting orange, orangey. I don't know.
On the
It's
back
all
end,
right,
yeah,
yeah.
it's like
There's a
like
slight
on the
orange
mint
to the
palate.
chocolate notes.
Yeah,
like,
orange candy. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it's rounding the chocolate.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a perfect holiday drink. I mean, it has that chocolatiness, that little herbaceous, that mint, like you said, that little citrus in the background. Like it's like eating orange chocolate almost. You know.
Yeah, as soon as you said holiday, I was thinking of those chocolate oranges that you would break apart.
Yeah.
And I was like immediately like.
It's got that bitter orange component of a chocolate like that. Exactly. Is this one hotter? Is this one in the 50s or is it still?
This one's actually also 90 proof. So we're at the same proof point as sourdough.
I'm also getting a lot of milk chocolate.
That mid finish, that mid palate has a lot of that milk chocolate. Then that finish has that.
The chocolate rye that's incorporated into this mash bill, even in really small percentages, is really present on the finished whiskey. We've done a 2 malt rye that was exclusively chocolate rye, and we only used 2.5%. And I couldn't tell you how many people would visit our tasting room and how many club members would taste it and go, "Where's this chocolate flavor? Why does this taste like chocolate?" I'm like, it's just from the darker toast on the grain. So, I think you're probably all familiar with how malting works, but the darker the toast, the darker the beer. So the longer that this grain is exposed to the kiln at the maltsters, the more caramelization that you're going to see on the exterior of the grain. And those really dark toasted grains have this almost bitter chocolate coffee flavor when you're just eating the grain itself. And so just a small percentage into that mash bill with that much sweeter, lightly caramelized malt just gives it that little bit of like that je ne sais quoi, right? That little bit of like, there's something here, there's something more complex and a little bit more dark and more depth to it than we see with whiskey where we're just using a pale malt.
Water brings out dragon fruit qualities in it. If you add a little bit more than 2 drops of water, it gives you the dragon fruit feel. Feels like you're biting into a dragon fruit.
I can agree. Yeah. The one thing though, I think I will say is where previously adding water really didn't change much of the like the complexion, the makeup of the whiskey. In this case, I feel like you've got the proof just right. I lose a lot of what I would consider the rye when I add water to this, and it's I'm frankly a little sad that I added too much water.
Speaking of having different palates, adding the water and proofing it down, it really finally brings out the chocolate for me. I'm not getting it at full proof, myself, all that much. It's the mint that kind of overwhelms. But the chocolate comes through for me as I start proofing it down.
Paul, are you a rye guy?
If I have to pick between bourbon and rye, I'm going rye, but I'm a malt guy.
A malt guy, okay.
Yeah.
And you're good company, Paul.
I mean, this I want this along with a Belgian Abbey ale, and that would be like a perfect evening for me at this point.
That was one of the things that made me just a little bit disappointed when we finally had this whiskey come to fruition after years and years of maturation and years of this collaboration with Bridgeport. By the time our whiskey was ready, I mean, you couldn't find Kingpin Red Ale. It hadn't been produced in some time. And so I was scouring the internet trying to get a bottle of Kingpin just to taste the beer alongside the whiskey. But you're absolutely right, though. I think that Abbey style would be really, really tasty with this whiskey.
I may have to save a little bit for later and do just that.
So the next whiskey that we're going to be tasting is the one that has the yellow sticker. And that is going to be our American Single Malt Krogstad Brewery collaboration. So again, another brewery collaboration, but instead of a cloned recipe, as we saw with Bridgeport, this is going to be a cask finish. And I mentioned earlier that this is the oldest single barrel release to date at 9 years. This was actually a pick from our Founders Club members. So Sean is a member of our Founders Club, and we do an annual event for those members that's exclusive to them. And the first one we did was actually out at the Barrel House, and we had a lot of single barrels pulled down from our storage, and we were barrel thieving samples and letting our members select the next optional release. And so out of all of the ones they got to taste that evening, the Krogstad was the clear winner. And it's a really interesting take on Westward whiskey. So it did go into a brand new American cask, just like all our new make does. We did go ahead and use that same Chico strain of ale yeast, the 001. We actually got the wash or the yeast itself from Krogstad Brewery. They still provide us with a lot of yeast. They're still great partners of ours. And so it's nice that the kind of story stays with this one brewery. So it's their wash, their yeast, and then we produce the whiskey 4 years in a lightly toasted American oak barrel. And then we transferred it to one of their wheat wine casks. So they do this really beautiful barrel-aged wheat wine. The particular product that was in barrel prior to Westward was called Old Lord Chubby Cheeks. And Old Lord Chubby Cheeks is a really great malty, really distinct high proof wheat wine. So much like a barley wine, right? But instead of using barley, you're using wheat. And then after about 4 years in that ex-wheat wine cask, we did go ahead and transfer it back into a Westward barrel that was previously used, so more of a neutral cask, just to kind of soften some of those edges and bring forward what we thought was a more balanced version of this expression. This was distilled way back in 2013 and came out, like I said, as part of that first Founders Club event, maybe 2021. The tasting notes I have here from Miles, our head distiller and head blender, we have some aroma of banana cream pie, some soft grape. We also have raspberry and dry papaya on the nose. Our palate is sweet fruit, creamy malts, and stewed apples. Apple to me is a flavor that's pretty consistent with Westward. I definitely get a lot of green apple and bright, fresh apple in a Westward Whiskey Original, where in some of our other expressions, I mean, we've done a whiskey with Belgian Ardennes Saison yeast, and that one was much more like red, delicious, darker apple flavor. But this is more of that stewed or cooked apple pie kind of esque. And then the finish here, you do get that little bit of gentle oak, subtle vanilla, allspice and really, really nutty malt. Here I get that really nutty, toasted malt on the finish of the Brookside wheat wine. Now, this is the only one I actually don't have a bottle of here with me tonight because it's completely sold out in Oregon. There are only a handful of bottles left of really all of these releases, specifically the Bridgeport Brewing collaboration and the wheat wine. We're down to, I think, the last 30 bottles or so of the Bridgeport, and the wheat wine, I want to say we have about 50 bottles left, and those are exclusive to be shipped from the website. If you are a club member, you'd have access to those. And again, I'd love to be tasting it with you tonight because I haven't had it in years, but we are all out here in Oregon. So I actually made a special request to get this out to Claire for your group tonight.
Now I feel bad I didn't send you some back.
No, it's okay. Trust me, if I want another bottle, I can order it from the website.
It's
Wow,
amazing.
this is very good. This
Yeah.
is I think another holiday special.
Now,
I'll make a
came-
special occasion anytime to drink Westward.
Right. This came in super soft on my palate to start. I got a lot of that orange. I said it was like in the very best way, the chewable vitamin C that I remember as a kid, which I used to. There's a very pleasant flavor, but it's weird. The orange didn't. Nothing like orange appeared in your tasting notes. Is anybody else getting something reminiscent of that soft, not the bitter orange like we had in the other one, but
No, almost like an orange creamsicle type thing. But I get some creaminess and some like milk lactones or something from the mouthfeel. So to me, like it's the papaya that really kind of stood out more on the edge of that. But the more it sits on the palate, it's moving into some of that like orange creamsicle type thing. So I don't quite get the like from the vitamin aspect, that kind of like sharp spike that I would associate with that. But I get the initial like soft layer that's kind of that bit of orange, turning into this like, I don't know, milky talky. Like I get the connection there, I guess. But
I'm with Michael on the orange, but I get it more. I got more of an orangey tarty, like if you get towards the rind and you taste the rind a little bit, that's what I'm getting.
got it. Yeah, what I love is how different the three expressions you've shared with us are from one another, yet all delicious. It's like before you have, if you have the first kid is a good, well-behaved kid, you're like, oh, I'm screwed on the next one. You realize, no, I can have different kids, all good, but all different.
All different and special in their own way.
Yeah,
But you can definitely taste age on this one. Definite. I mean, at the finish, you can tell it has more age than the other three that we tried today.
But the taste and the experience for me is really fresh. There's like a floral bouquet in the nose, and it's really like, for me, a great springtime light air whiskey, I don't know if anybody else gets that, but
No, I can definitely see this as a springtime.
What's the proof on this one? 90 again?
This one's also 90. Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with you on the floral aspect. It's the first thing I got in the nose as well, with a little bit of like citrus. But I even thought I detected a little bit of like light anise, like somewhere on the nose. And but when I tasted it now, I'm looking for that. I'm like, wow, I got so much licorice because that's what's on my mind. I'm like, not in a bad way. I know people are kind of polarized by that, but it's fantastic.
I got no licorice.
Really?
yeah.
Even I didn't get
I'm
my
polarized and sensitive to licorice, but I'm actually not kind of getting that here. So
Probably for the best then, right?
yeah. I'm
is.
pleasantly surprised.
No licorice is good.
This is the chewest of the three whiskeys we've tasted until now. Very, very interesting.
Anybody get lemongrass just lingering at the end? Okay, and it wasn't just me. It just hit me, and I was like, lemongrass.
Come to think of it, I'm tasting it now too, and the fruit changes. I mean, when she mentioned green apples, I do taste a little bit of it. Then I taste the oranges a little bit later. Then the more I sip that, I'm tasting different fruits along. I mean, the anise, the licorice do come through. There's a little bit of chocolate. It's like eating a very good Christmas cake. I mean, at least to
Yeah,
me.
Christmas. Yeah,
It does have a
Christmas
little
cake. I agree. This is Christmas cake.
Christmas cake with dried papaya, though. I'm still going back with the papaya.
It's our tropical version. Yes.
Oh, we're in Florida.
Anyone getting sandalwood on finish?
Oh,
A little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of what the lemongrass is kind of more of a sandalwood to me, like a woodier spice that I'm getting.
It's sort of that almost like the Missouri wood type of thing.
Lauren, please set aside 2 bottles for me. I'll
You got it. I can either invoice you for them and send it directly to you to make your life easy, or I can direct you to the webpage where you can do a little perusing and shopping.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Because this one I'm surely going to bunker this one.
Like I said, I'm disappointed that there's no more left here in Oregon, but I know there's a handful of bottles left that are just waiting for a good home. And I saw a question here from Joe too about carrying Westward in Florida. So Florida is one of the states that we can ship to if you want to buy direct from us. That's where you'd be able to purchase some of these more unique expressions, as none of this is distributed, the whiskey that you're tasting this evening. But we also have a really great feature on the website where you can type in your zip code and you can find all of your local liquor stores that carry Westward in your region. And we do have quite a bit of a following in Florida, which is great. And it's one of the places that we were just visiting recently for part of our national events. We did some library tastings in Florida this year, and I believe we're planning to come back again next year. It's my first time visiting Florida. I gotta say, I had a fabulous time, and I look forward to coming back again.
Beautiful.
Where in Florida were you?
We did one event in Port Orange and one event in Clearwater.
Okay. We're in Orlando. So if you're ever in Orlando,
Yeah, they're by the coast.
Yeah, I think that the next year plan is to go a little more central, so we can be closer to Orlando and some of those more major cities. All right. So I kind of want to just reiterate here with what we're tasting again. These are all Western Whiskey Club releases, and sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think this is after Dobbs. This is my favorite now. The one.
Oh, the Dobbs release was so good.
Yeah.
So for those of you who aren't familiar, I don't even really want to sell you on it because it's all gone. But we actually got these really interesting casks. They started as Brown-Forman barrels. They were bourbon barrels. And then they were actually used by a tequila producer. After the tequila producer had them, they were picked up by our friends over at Dobbs Family Estate Winery here in the Valley. And they use them for their Untethered series, which is kind of like our club series. It's where they do really unique, innovative projects outside of their normal wheelhouse. And so what they did was they wanted to make a dessert wine. And so they made a Pinot Noir Rosé dessert wine in these ex-tequila barrels. Then we took that barrel and kind of riffed on a port finish, right? And we did a dessert wine, so a rosé finish on the Westward. But because it was previously a spirit barrel before it was that wine cask, it wasn't cloyingly sweet. It wasn't overly it didn't overwhelm the whiskey. You still had some really great herbaceous quality to it from that tequila that was in there before. And just a really special, fun collaboration. But I mean, that's the kind of funky stuff that we like to do for the club. There's no bad idea. There's nothing that we really won't try or experiment with. I will say that one of the questions we get more often than not is, do any of your experiments fail? Is there anything that hasn't seen the light of day? There are, but we're still getting creative in how we can potentially manipulate these whiskeys to make them something that we love. One great example, though, of a whiskey that will never probably be bottled in its current state is actually our experiment with Oregon White Oak. So using Garyana, we were really excited about doing something hyper local. So it was all Oregon grown malt. We used a special yeast strain that we got from Imperial, which is a local yeast brand. And And we aged it in Garyana oak, and the Garyana overwhelmed so much of the flavor that we love in Westward that it became really raisinated, really like dark cooked fruit, opposed to that bright fresh fruit that we typically see. And so we've used a very small amount of it in our Elements series, but it's one that as all the distillers taste and as all of the Westward staff taste, we go, this doesn't even taste like Westward. It's just so different from what we typically do. And that's one thing that we really want to see, that consistent line through all of our different expressions, is that you know you're drinking Westward. I mean, of course, all of these are different. They're unique from each other. But I think there is that core backbone that has the Westward signature flavor profile and aroma on it. And as we talked about before, being really simple in how we approach distillation, and these 5 simple ingredients, I mean, 2 of which are kind of irrelevant: water and the time it spends in cask. So, with the first whiskey, that's when we were manipulating the yeast strain and using that sourdough instead of the ale yeast. The second whiskey, we switched up the mash bill. So in addition to 2-row malt, we started integrating different types of rye malt. And then the last one, again, is a cask finish. So the whiskey started out the exact same way that we produced original, and through that maturation process is how we kind of changed and heightened and enhanced the finished product.
So I'm just wondering if anybody used different glasses for the tonight. If you go back to the very first glass and smell it, I keep doing that because I'm just getting like that dough just punches you right in the face.
It's a totally different animal.
Well, yeah, and I'm loving it.
Oh yeah, it's a sugar cookie.
I'm absolutely a huge fan of that sourdough.
That sourdough was amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad you enjoy it. Yeah, this is definitely one of our most unique expressions and one of my personal favorites as well. I look forward to us continuing to make more and continuing to develop the partnership that we have with Ken's Artisan, because I want this to be readily available. I get really sad when I run out. I have to wait 3, 4, 5, 6 more years until we have another batch ready. So I'm excited at the prospect of having this be something more consistent for us.
Well, I love the fact that it's a James Beard award-winning baker that you're using their sourdough starter.
It's one of those things. Quality is, that's what we want. Our whole thing is about creating the best possible version of malt whiskey that we can. And so all of our partners have to be in line with the level of quality that we expect from our whiskey. And so, of course, Ken Forkish was a natural partner for us. And we're hoping to not only continue that partnership with Ken, but we're looking for other sourdough producers that are willing to let us have some of their starter to see what will come of that. So we've been doing a lot of outreach the last couple of years, specifically in the San Francisco area, because of their fame for making some of the best sourdough in the world. It's interesting though. You think that it would be pretty easy to get some sourdough starter off of a baker, but they don't want to let it go. I've been mailing out bottles of our sourdough whiskey in hopes that they'll taste it and understand that we're not going to do anything that I don't think they would be not proud of, and hopefully that we'll have some more different types of starter just to develop more complexity in the finished glass as well.
See, you should try to partner with Food Network
and send a Canadian.
She is Canadian, seriously, try partnering with Food Network and see if do some co-branding.
That actually is a good idea. I know that we've had some connect with actually Alton Brown, who I can't remember how we connected
him from Georgia.
But that to me is like the perfect art and science, just like distillation. It's this blend of those two, and romance meets.
And we immediately left to.
Distillation.
He's from Atlanta.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. We immediately left to wish I could drink that beer with Kingpin with the Kingpin whiskey. When you're doing food pairings with sourdough and sourdough, I think that's really wide open to run through also, is that people who are either using sourdough bread or sourdough in their pizzas or whatever else would probably love to try a sourdough whiskey next to that to see if they sense the elements of the bread that they're eating in the whiskey itself.
I love that you brought that up, because for us, food is very much a part of what defines us as well. So we have some really great suggested pairings on the website for our core expressions, but all of our release events that we do for the club are really tailored to the whiskey themselves. And so for the sourdough release, we did have Theo here at I'm gesturing our tasting rooms right now. We had Theo here in our tasting room, and he was serving up sourdough bread alongside the whiskey. We had some really beautiful cultured butter, and it was just casual and simple and approachable. But that's the kind of stuff that we love to do. It's like, let's just get some really beautiful, high quality ingredients, treat them with care, don't over manipulate them, let them kind of shine. And being able to taste, the bread made with the same starter as the whiskey side by side was truly a special experience. And so that's the kind of stuff that we really love to do for our club events, is these really fun pairings and things of that nature. All right, so I know that we're all kind of tasting and enjoying still and kind of going back and forth, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about our True Northwest Old Fashioned, since you do have the ingredients here in front of you to enjoy one of those. I hope that if you haven't had Westward Original, you do give us, do sample that larger sample that Claire sent to you, or even just have a little sip to compare and contrast along with the others. It's a fun kind of, again, kind of going back to zero, as we talked about, like this is the original, and let's see how it's manipulated and changed for the other expressions. But our True Northwest Old Fashioned is kind of our signature cocktail here at Westward. And we like to, again, highlight the flavors of our whiskey and highlight some of the amazing partners and artisans that are here, alongside us here in the American Northwest. So what we do is we take Westward Whiskey Original. We use 2 ounces for our Old Fashioned, and we are adding some Jacobson Company raw carrot flower honey. That would be the little honey stick that you get. When I'm making my True Northwest Old Fashioned, I definitely make a honey syrup. I keep it in the fridge. Lasts usually about 3 months. And it just makes it a little easier to dissolve that honey in your whiskey. But tonight, if you haven't made the syrup or choose not to make it, just make sure that you stir it really well with Westward prior to adding your ice. I know it seems like pretty much an obvious, but once you add ice, you will have hard honey and liquid whiskey, and they will not want to mix together. So make sure you dissolve it really well into the whiskey first. We also use some really beautiful, so again, I have these products here, but I'm forgetting to. So this is the honey, it's Jacobson's raw carrot flower honey. And then we're also using some of their really beautiful, pure, flaky sea salt. And this is, just harvested right on Netarts Bay on the Oregon coast. It's kind of the local version of Maldon, really nice and flaky. So a little pinch of that into your mixing glass. And then we've also partnered with a local bitters company called the Portland Bitters, Bitter Housewife.
Wait, Lauren, sorry, really quick. They got the minis of the aromatic bitters.
Oh, they got the minis of the aromatic. My apologies. I have that one too.
Yeah. We also have this hazelnut bitters, but it doesn't come in the small travel size. So I sent you the very cute little Portland aromatic. Yeah, those guys. A little smaller.
Actually, it's funny because I said Portland Bitters Project, but I held up the wrong one. So this is Portland Bitters Project. This is a company, of course, locally here. Cindy, who runs this company, is just a fabulous person. What I love about the way that they make bitters, and specifically their aromatic bitters, is that they actually make individual batches of bitters for each aromatic that they are going to incorporate into the finished product. And then just like with whiskey blending, they add small amounts of each one until they get their consistent flavor profile. So they're not making a recipe that includes a lot of different herbs and spices. They're actually making individual bitters and then blending a little bit of orange peel and a little bit of, whatever other components they're using in their aromatic, which I think is a really fun way to do it. There is a little bit of cardamom in here. They're, of course, using some gentian root for that bittering quality, but really delicious bitters. These are fabulous in any old fashioned or lots of cocktails. And so 4 dashes of that. I like to go a little heavy myself because I like my cocktail to be a little less sweet, a little more bitter forward. And then you're just going to stir to dilute. About 20 seconds of dilution will give you about 20% water content. An old fashioned is the original cocktail, right? It's spirit, sugar, water, bitters. So this is just a really beautiful expression of an old fashioned using local ingredients made by some of our friends here in the Portland area. I think the addition of salt is really nice on this cocktail too, and I hope that you enjoy it and start putting salt in all of your cocktails. Because as someone who spent 12 years working in kitchens and have a culinary background, salt just enhances all the other flavors. You're going to taste more of the flavors in the cocktail just by adding that little pinch of salt. You can also put it a little bit on top of like a large cube if that's how you like to enjoy your old fashioned, and then it'll slowly incorporate into the cocktail, and also keep your ice nice and cold, right? The same way that you think about, making ice cream base and adding some salt to the ice to keep it super, super cold. It'll break down the ice on top and kind of keep your cocktail nice and cold.
I learned the hard way that putting honey into a Glencairn glass just nests it in that little bottom circle. wrong glass to blend it.
With 2 little kids, I have to hide the honey stick, otherwise it will be gone.
I can relate to that for sure. My little one, and anytime she sees those, she's like, "Can I have a honey stick?" I'm like, "I don't know. Are you going to go to your grand's house? Is it warm outside? Can I just send you outside and run around in circles?" Because you're going to be all hopped up on sugar.
I did not anticipate that I was going to be making cocktails right now, but somehow, some way, I have everything in front of me. I don't know what that says.
I think it's like that you were prepared, and you may have twisted your arm a little bit, but I'm glad you're doing it.
Cheers.
Cheers. Like, what's not to love here? I want to thank you again all for being a part of this tasting tonight and for having us. We always appreciate your support over here at Westward, and it's always been fabulous to engage with Whiskey Mavens, and tonight's been no exception. So I really appreciate your hospitality and your willingness to just be here and share and engage with us. This is quite lovely, and I definitely miss doing these types of things and being able to speak to people, all over. We've got, obviously people from all over the US here joining us tonight, and it's really nice to connect in this kind of intimate way where it doesn't feel like we're so far apart. So this is a really great way to kind of kick off the holiday season, following Thanksgiving right into the Christmas season, and enjoy some really great whiskey together. So I thank you for being here.
Yeah,
I never thought salt would elevate a cocktail.
Yeah.
The more you know, right?
And I just dropped my email into the chat. If anyone has any specific questions, I'm happy to forward them along to Lauren and connect you directly. She's pretty busy every year. Actually, Lauren, do you want to talk a little bit, for those that aren't aware, of the most recent club release?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and then maybe a little tease of what's coming next year for those.
I do like to divulge all the information. I'm definitely someone who I do not withhold. I love teasing and spoiling all the things to come.
I did the same thing in Vegas, and then after I said cognac, I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I was supposed to say that," but it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't like it was like a week before the release.
I will say that I've gotten into trouble doing that before too. It's been like, "Oh, okay, I know that this is coming out, or this is something that we're thinking could be a potential release," and then we go to taste it and we go, "Oh, not ready yet," and then I have to backpedal and go, "Well, it's going to be a future release, but not until next year or the year after," which is what I did with the mezcal barrel. So I can relate to that. But our current release that we just actually just came out 10 days ago is a cognac finish. So we actually acquired these really beautiful 40-plus-year-old barrels from Hennessy. They're all XO casks. Wow. And we finished Westward in them just like we did for the wheat wine, right? So brought it up in brand new American white oak until it was fully mature, and then transferred it to these beautiful cognac barrels. And so it's this lovely kind of marriage between cognac and single malt. And for me, it is like my go-to right now for the holidays. It's been a really, really delicious, kind of fun, unique expression for us. We have never done this type of release before. And it was actually part of, we did 2 separate releases this quarter. So the secondary release, which is exclusive to our Founders Club members, is a cider cask. And again, this is the first for the Whiskey Club. We partnered with Two Towns Cider House, which is a local cider maker. And they aged their Imperial Bad Apple cider in our Westward barrels already. So it was a natural kind of partnership collaboration that was born from us giving out our Westward barrels for them to age their cider in, and then politely asking for them back. And so we could age whiskey in these bad apple casks. We talked a little bit about apple being kind of a signature flavor profile on Westward, in addition to those really great floral notes that we have, and that earthy quality, that great sweetness and spice. And so this has been kind of, to me, a lovely expression that highlights the agriculture of our region, and having some beautiful apple orchards surrounding us, and this great cider company making some delicious stuff. So this cider cask finish is also a really fabulous new release. Moving into 2024, we've got some really fun stuff planned. I'm not going to give it all away, but I will say that there is finally a Oloroso sherry cask coming to fruition, which is probably one of the #1 requested whiskeys that we get. And so I'm really excited about that one. That'll come out in 2024. We also have, we like to experiment with different types of malt varieties. And actually recently we spent some time here at the distillery making individual batches of Westward using one specific type of varietal. We were trying to isolate really what we thought was the best barley for Westward. And as part of these experiments, we got in a silo of Vienna malt. And so we're doing a Vienna malt release in February, which will be really exciting. We also have some high proof whiskeys coming out for the club for the first time ever. Most club offerings, with the exception of some optional releases, have all been at 45% or 90 proof. But we'll be doing some cask strength whiskey for the club this year again, which is club member demand, which I love. All the feedback we get from our members are things that we implement into the innovation and to the selections that we make. So we're doing a high proof cuvee, which is going to be a blend of different wine finishes. There's some fun stuff coming up. We're doing another Founders Club pick that's yet to be seen, but I know some of the barrels that will be part of that lineup, and we've got some really funky stuff that we're going to share with our Founders Club members. There's actually a Gamla finished barrel that we have. We have a spelt whiskey. We have a couple of IPA finishes that we're looking to use for that as well. But you mentioned this anise flavor earlier, right? How it can be kind of polarizing, that licorice flavor. But one of those spirits that we produce here is aquavit. And that's simply because Christian is of Norwegian descent. And there was a time where you could not purchase aquavit in Oregon. It wasn't being imported and no one was making it. So he made it for his own personal consumption and started sharing it with friends and visitors at the distillery. And then it became something we started to bottle and just sell out of our tasting rooms. And then Krogstad aquavit became the fastest growing aquavit in the US quickly thereafter. And Gamla is our barrel aged version. So it's aged in ex-Pinot Noir casks. So this whiskey will be, the barrel itself started as a Pinot Noir cask. Then we aged our really beautiful aquavit that has caraway and star anise in it. And then Westward went into the barrel. So I'm personally really excited about this one as a huge fan of that anise flavor. And so that'll be an optional release that our Founders members can select. So lots of fun stuff coming down the pipeline. There's lots of innovation currently happening. This will be a few years out, but we're actually experimenting with some smoked malt for the first time. That's another question we get a lot. Are you guys going to ever do anything with peat? Are you ever going to do anything that's a little smokier? And so, of course, we are looking to, again, look at our terroir and our region. We're always inspired by the abundance of the region around us. So we have an alderwood smoked whiskey that we actually just put into barrel not that long ago. So that'll be a few years out, but I'm excited again to see how that turns out and continue to kind of innovate and push the boundaries. So if there's something that you want to see, we want to hear about it because we'll probably try it. We're willing to pretty much do anything as long as we stick to, our philosophy of, again, high quality ingredients, treat them with care, and produce something that we think is the best version that we can.
Yeah, that was nice, Karen, Lauren. Thank you for guiding us through this flight. hope to do many more such virtual tastings and get more people on board Westward. And that said, I'm just putting in my order for the one I said I'm going to.
The wheat wine. Well, thank you so much for your continued support, and again for your audience tonight. It's been so lovely to have you all here, and we just can't thank you enough for your support.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.
Cheers.
It's a pleasure.
Cheers.
It was very good.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.